True power has always been misunderstood by those obsessed with weapons, armies, and intimidation. When Modi spoke after the Trump-Putin meeting, he dismantled that illusion without raising his voice. He reminded the world that a nation's might is not measured by the number of fighter jets it possesses, nor by the length of its missile range, but by its ability to set the moral compass of civilization. And here is the uncomfortable truth: every empire in history has eventually fallen, not because its armies were defeated in the field, but because it lost its sense of right and wrong. When Rome collapsed, it wasn't the barbarians who truly destroyed it. It was the rot within. When the Soviet Union dissolved, it wasn't NATO's tanks that tore it apart. It was the erosion of belief in its own ideology. Modi's warning was clear: if today's powers continue to chase dominance without defining a purpose worthy of humanity, they are building empires of sand, destined to be swept away by the tide of time. In the aftermath of the Trump-Putin talks, the temptation for nations is to scramble for their place in the new hierarchy, to form alliances out of fear, to arm themselves out of paranoia, to hoard resources out of greed. But Modi's words pierced that short-sightedness. He was telling leaders, the battle you think you are fighting is not the real battle. The real battle is for the human mind, the human heart, and the human future. He spoke of moral leadership not as an abstract idea, but as the most practical, strategic advantage any nation can have. A nation trusted by others becomes a magnet for allies, trade, and influence, and this trust cannot be purchased with weapons or forced through treaties signed under pressure. It is earned through decades of consistency, integrity, and the courage to speak truth even when it is inconvenient. Imagine two leaders at the negotiating table, one who can destroy cities in an hour, and another who can inspire entire continents in a sentence. History has shown, time and again, that the latter will shape the world far longer than the former. Modi's message was essentially this: the leader who shapes the moral conversation will, in time, shape the political and economic realities as well. But why is this so chilling, as the world described it? Because it forces the powerful to face their deepest insecurity, the realization that brute force will eventually become irrelevant if it is not anchored in moral vision. Every superpower believes it is invincible until the world stops believing in its story. Modi's warning hinted that this shift in belief can happen overnight. His words carried the weight of history and the urgency of the present. In a time when misinformation spreads faster than facts, when leaders weaponize fear instead of hope, and when the very concept of truth is under siege, moral leadership is not just a virtue, it is survival. He was effectively telling Trump, Putin, and every other leader listening, your nations will be remembered not for how you controlled the present, but for how you shaped the future. This is why his statement transcended politics. It wasn't India versus America or India versus Russia. It was India standing as a mirror, reflecting the weaknesses of all great powers, including itself, and daring them to acknowledge what they see. It was a call to arms, but not for soldiers, a call to arms for thinkers, for builders, for citizens who still believe that humanity's destiny should be determined by more than raw power. Modi's tone was calm, but beneath it was an iron conviction. India will define its role not by joining someone else's empire, but by proving that leadership rooted in principles can outlast leadership rooted in fear. And perhaps the most unsettling part of his message was the subtle suggestion that the world's so-called superpowers may not remain super forever if they ignore this truth. True power, as Modi framed it, is the ability to align strength with purpose, force with vision, and influence with justice. Without that alignment, the mightiest nations will eventually be forgotten. With it, even the smallest can rise to shape the world. That is the kind of power that cannot be destroyed, only inherited, and only by those brave enough to carry it. Global alliances are not carved into stone. They are written in sand, and the tide is coming in. After the Trump-Putin meeting, most analysts focused on who shook hands, who smiled, and who gained leverage. But Modi's response cut through the superficial theater and pointed at the truth. Alliances are shifting, and India will not sit in the audience while the play unfolds. The problem with how most nations operate is that they mistake stability for loyalty. They think that because two countries have been partners for decades, that bond is unbreakable. History proves otherwise. Britain and America were once at war. China and the United States once fought alongside each other in World War II. The Soviet Union and Germany had a non-aggression pact until the day they didn't. Modi's warning was simple. In geopolitics, yesterday's friend can be tomorrow's rival, and yesterday's rival can become tomorrow's ally. The only constant is change, and the only way to survive it is to be prepared to lead it. When Trump and Putin sit down, they are not just negotiating for today. They are laying the foundations for a future where the balance of power is different. If other nations are simply reacting to this, they are already behind. Modi's statement hinted that India refuses to be reactive. Instead of waiting to be invited to someone else's table, India intends to set its own. This is where his message becomes unsettling for traditional powers, because it disrupts the expectation that India will simply align itself with whichever side offers the best deal. Modi was essentially telling the world, India's decisions will not be made out of fear of isolation, nor out of blind loyalty to old friendships. They will be made based on what serves India's long-term vision for itself and for the world. That is a terrifying idea to leaders who rely on predictability in their allies. Consider the weight of that. If India chooses to position itself as a swing force capable of aligning temporarily with one bloc and then with another when it serves its goals, it gains unprecedented strategic freedom. It cannot be cornered. It cannot be easily coerced. And because it maintains relationships across rival camps, it can broker deals, diffuse tensions, and shape the narrative without being trapped in someone else's ideology. But here is the deeper truth Modi was pointing toward. Alliances based on fear of a common enemy are fragile. They dissolve the moment the threat shifts or disappears. Alliances based on shared values, however, can last generations. The danger in today's geopolitical climate is that too many partnerships are built on convenience, not conviction. That's why they crumble under stress. Modi was implicitly challenging every leader listening to ask themselves, is your alliance real, or is it an act of survival? And perhaps this is where his message becomes most dangerous, because it forces leaders to face the possibility that the structures holding their influence together could collapse if one or two key partners walk away. For the United States, for Russia, for China, this is a sobering thought. For India, it is an opportunity. He was making it clear. In a time when others are scrambling to lock in deals and cling to the familiar, India will play the long game. It will forge partnerships on its own terms, break them if necessary, and adapt faster than those stuck in outdated frameworks. That requires a certain fearlessness, the willingness to stand alone for a season in order to stand stronger in the future. This is why his message was not just chilling, but destabilizing for those who heard it clearly. Because it meant that in the coming years, any meeting between two global powers, whether in Alaska, Beijing, or Delhi, will have to factor in not just what India thinks, but what India might decide to do next. That unpredictability, when grounded in principle, is one of the most potent strategic weapons any nation can have. Modi's tone wasn't aggressive. It didn't need to be. The power of his words lay in the certainty that India is no longer a passive player in the game. It is a force that will not just adapt to the shifting alliances of the world, but actively reshape them. And for those who still think they can predict every move, that is the most chilling reality of all. Economic independence is not a slogan, it is the difference between standing tall and kneeling in the dust. When Modi spoke after the Trump-Putin meeting, he knew the cameras would focus on diplomacy, handshakes, and subtle smiles. But beneath that surface theater lies the real battlefield, not armies, not alliances, but economics. The nation that depends on others for its lifeblood will eventually find a hand on its throat. Modi's message was razor sharp. If you cannot feed your people without imports, if you cannot fuel your industry without foreign supply chains, if your markets collapse because another nation sneezes, then you are not free, you are living on borrowed sovereignty, and borrowed sovereignty is an illusion that vanishes the moment your lender decides to call in the debt. The timing of his statement was no accident. The Trump-Putin talks hinted at potential shifts in trade flows, energy routes, and global markets. Every realignment between two major powers causes ripple effects that reach the farthest shores. For countries that lack economic resilience, those ripples hit like tidal waves. Modi's warning was not just for India, it was for any nation that hopes to survive the coming storms without being swept under. History is merciless on this point. Colonial empires thrived by making nations economically dependent, turning once proud civilizations into captive markets. In the 20th century, it wasn't only armies that crushed countries, it was debt traps, resource control, and the quiet strangulation of economic leverage. And yet, here we are in the 21st century, watching new forms of the same game unfold. Modi's message cut through the polite diplomatic language. If your economy is chained to another's mercy, you are not their partner, you are their subject. What makes this chilling is that it forces leaders to confront the uncomfortable truth that independence has a price, and that price is sacrifice. It means rejecting short-term comfort for long-term survival. It means building industries that may take years to turn profitable. It means enduring the political backlash that comes when cheap imports vanish and citizens demand instant relief. It means resisting the temptation to solve today's hunger by selling tomorrow's harvest. India's push for self-reliance, Atmanirbhar Bharat, is not mere nationalism dressed in economic clothing. It is a survival blueprint in a world where trade routes can be shut overnight, sanctions can appear without warning, and supply chains can be weaponized as easily as missiles. Modi's warning, in essence, was this: the next great war will not start with gunfire, it will start when a nation realizes its fuel tank is empty, its ports are blocked, and its factories stand silent because the parts they need are sitting in another country's warehouse. But Modi didn't just frame this as a threat, he framed it as an opportunity. Economic independence is not isolationism. It is the power to engage with the world on equal terms. It is the ability to choose partnerships out of strength, not desperation. It is the freedom to say no without fearing economic collapse. And here lies the strategic genius. When a nation no longer fears the consequences of walking away from a bad deal, it becomes far harder to manipulate. For Trump and Putin, the subtext was clear: India intends to be a trading partner, not a trading hostage. This changes the calculations for every power that hopes to draw India deeper into its sphere of influence. A self-reliant India cannot be bought cheaply, bullied easily, or bribed into compromise. It will engage with the world, yes, but from a position where it can walk away at any moment without looking back. That is what makes economic independence the most terrifying weapon in geopolitics. Armies can be matched. Technology can be stolen, but a nation that can sustain itself is a nation that cannot be conquered without destroying everything in the process. And that reality forces even the most powerful adversaries to pause before they strike. In Modi's calm, deliberate tone, there was an unspoken truth. The India of the future will trade, but it will not beg. It will collaborate, but it will not kneel. And in a century where economic dependence has replaced open colonization, that kind of independence is not just power, it is survival. Diplomacy without courage is nothing but dressed-up cowardice. It may look refined, it may sound polished, and it may fool television audiences, but it collapses the moment real risk appears. After the Trump-Putin talks, much of the world was quick to praise the diplomatic tone and constructive dialogue, but Modi's message sliced through that polite applause like glass through silk. He reminded everyone that diplomacy, which exists only to avoid discomfort, is not diplomacy at all. It is surrender wearing a smile. In the halls of global politics, weakness often masquerades as restraint. Leaders hide behind phrases like maintaining stability or avoiding escalation, when in truth they are terrified of taking a stand. Modi's warning was that this kind of behavior is the fastest way to lose both respect and influence. Because the world does not follow the leader who is most agreeable, it follows the one who is willing to speak hard truths when they are least welcome. History offers brutal evidence of this. In the 1930s, leaders across Europe believed they could avoid conflict by appeasing Hitler. They signed agreements, shook hands, and congratulated themselves on their diplomatic brilliance until the tanks rolled across their borders. In every era, the pattern is the same. Those who choose comfort over courage invite the very danger they sought to avoid. Modi's point was chilling because it implied that the same mistake is being repeated today, under the cover of strategic patience. When Trump and Putin met, the world's smaller nations were watching carefully, some hoping for stability, others fearing backroom deals that could shift borders, markets, or alliances overnight. Modi's response was a challenge. Do not let the illusion of calm make you blind to the truth of power. He was saying that diplomacy is not the art of smiling while being strangled. It is the art of ensuring that no one dares to put their hands on your throat in the first place. Courage in diplomacy does not mean reckless aggression. It means being willing to endure discomfort, to risk temporary isolation, to take unpopular positions, to speak against the tide of global consensus if that tide is flowing toward disaster. It means refusing to sign agreements that compromise your future simply because walking away would be awkward. Modi's warning was that in the age of rapid global shifts, those who lack this courage will wake up one day to find that their nation's destiny has been decided entirely by others. And here lies the heart of the matter. Courage is contagious, but so is fear. When one major power hesitates, others begin to doubt. When one leader speaks boldly, others find their own voice. Modi's words had the potential to ripple far beyond India, encouraging nations caught between rival powers to stop acting like pawns and start behaving like players. This is precisely why such a message unsettles the established order. It threatens to inspire independence in those who have been taught to obey. The danger of cowardly diplomacy is not just that it fails to protect you, it actively invites exploitation. Predators in politics can smell fear the way wolves smell blood. They will test your boundaries inch by inch until you have none left. Modi's statement was a reminder that respect in international relations is never given freely. It is earned and sometimes demanded through the clear willingness to defend your interests even when it costs you. For Trump and Putin, the subtext was unmistakable. India will speak plainly, even when the room is filled with powerful ears. It will not dilute its message to make others comfortable. It will not bury its principles beneath polite silence. And this, more than any trade deal or military pact, changes how others must approach it. The chilling brilliance of Modi's point was that it exposed the truth most leaders will not admit, that the greatest danger to a nation is not the enemy outside its borders, but the cowardice inside its leadership. Without courage, diplomacy becomes a ceremony, pretty, meaningless, and fatal. With courage, it becomes a shield, a sword, and a compass, all at once. And in the unstable century ahead, only those who carry it will survive. The future will belong to those who can lead without fear of isolation. In a world that measures power by the size of your alliances, this is a terrifying thought for most leaders. They cling to the comfort of international approval like a lifeline, terrified that standing alone will mean falling into irrelevance. Modi's message after the Trump-Putin meeting shattered that illusion. He made it clear the ability to walk alone, to chart your own course when no one stands beside you, is not a weakness. It is the rarest and most decisive form of strength. Isolation, in the political sense, is often painted as a death sentence. Nations are warned that if they defy the consensus, they will face economic retaliation, diplomatic cold shoulders, or worse. But history's sharpest lessons tell us something different. The United States in its early years stood largely apart from Europe's entanglements, yet it grew into a superpower. Japan, after centuries of self-imposed isolation, emerged into the modern world with an identity strong enough to resist being swallowed by larger empires. Even India, in the early decades after independence, maintained a fiercely independent foreign policy that allowed it to navigate between Cold War giants without becoming a pawn. Modi's chilling point was that in an era where alliances shift like sand, the leader who fears isolation will never truly lead, only follow. And following in a rapidly changing world means becoming irrelevant the moment your patron changes direction. The courage to lead alone forces you to develop self-reliance, forces you to clarify your values, and forces you to innovate instead of imitating. It forges a kind of national character that is immune to the panic of being left out. The Trump-Putin talks were a reminder to the world that global power is often decided in private rooms by a small number of people. For many nations, the instinct is to scramble for a chair in those rooms, to beg for a voice in the conversation, to avoid being shut out. Modi's warning was the opposite. Sometimes the most strategic move is to step back from the table entirely and build your own. Because the moment you believe that your future depends on someone else inviting you in, you've already surrendered control of it. But make no mistake, leading without fear of isolation does not mean being hostile, arrogant, or permanently alone. It means being willing to face that moment when every ally turns away, and still moving forward with unshaken purpose. It means refusing to compromise your principles to gain short-term approval. It means understanding that respect is often given only after you've proven you don't need it. This is why his message was so unsettling to the powers listening. If India embraces this mindset fully, it cannot be cornered. If it can withstand the pressure of standing alone, it cannot be coerced into deals that betray its long-term interests. If it can lead without permission, it can shape the global agenda instead of reacting to it. And for rival powers, this is a nightmare scenario, because a nation that does not fear isolation is a nation that can outlast political storms that would break lesser states. The danger in today's world is that too many leaders see isolation as a cliff, a final drop into political irrelevance. Modi's message reframed it as a mountain, a place from which you can see further, think clearer, and decide your next move without the noise of the crowd. That perspective transforms isolation from a threat into an advantage. For those watching from Washington, Moscow, Beijing, and beyond, the implications were unmistakable. India is not seeking safety in numbers. It is seeking clarity in independence. And when a nation of over 1 billion people, with a rising economy and growing influence, chooses to stand on its own terms, the world has no choice but to adjust around it. The most chilling part of Modi's statement was not what he said, it was the unspoken message beneath it. We do not need your permission to lead. That is the kind of confidence that reshapes borders, rewrites trade routes, and redefines the hierarchy of nations. And as history has always shown, the future will never belong to those who wait for the crowd. It will belong to those who are willing to walk into the unknown alone, and by doing so, create a path for others to follow.